questions, your name, agency, title, role, anything that might be helpful for us to know about. I'm Kathy Collins Robinson. I am the chair of this committee, and I am the chair of the education programs over at Durham PreK. Happy to see you all today. So as we always do, please remember to mute yourself unless you're speaking. If you can, have your camera on. Use the chat box for your communications, for comments and questions. Be patient with those technical challenges if they occur. And if you have to leave before 10:30, just let Tamara know in the chat box. So we are live streaming this as we do with all of our governance committee meetings. So we're ready to get started. So on the next slide. Okay, here are the objectives. So we've got 4 things to do. First thing we're going to do is review and approve the minute notes from May. And I do believe we've got a quorum now. Linda, is that correct?
I think so. I'm double checking.
Okay, great. Then we will get an update on the 2025-26 budget and spending priorities. We will review the teacher compensation support payments, the final seat reimbursement rates. Then we're going to hear from Durham's Partnership for Children about some NC pre-K updates and view celebrations. And then before we go to the next slide, I just would like to thank everyone for their advocacy efforts in the past few weeks. And particularly would like to thank Brittany for coming up with that wonderful advocacy campaign that you all had access to. So thank you all, thank you all, thank you all. And advocacy is going to be something important that we need to keep doing in the next year. So stay tuned for some more efforts as we continue on. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, May meeting notes. So you received those earlier. And if you all could take a quick look at the minute notes, and then when we are ready, if you have any questions, just let us know, any corrections. If none, and we're ready to vote, I'll be looking for a motion to approve those minutes. Any questions or corrections or clarifications for the May meeting notes?
I move that we accept the minutes as presented from May 2025.
Thanks, Jason.
Brittany, second.
Thanks, Brittany. Okay, so as before, if you're in favor, don't do anything. But if you're not in favor of approving the minutes, please let us know. Raise your hand, indicate in some way if you're not approving. All right, I'm not seeing anything. So we have approved the May meeting notes unanimously. Thanks, everybody. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Linda to tell us all about the budget stuff.
Okay, thank you all so much for being here today. We really appreciate it. And I also echo Kathy's thanks for those of you who had the opportunity to put in your thoughts and words to our elected officials regarding the budget. As you're aware, we talked about in our May meeting, the budget prospects were quite limited this year. The funding is very tight in Durham. as it is in many communities this year. But there are bright spots to tell you about. So our current year's budget will be the same budget next year. So we received flat funding. $7,373,029 goes into our agency. There are other dollars that go into the preschool arena from the county. So when you hear, if you read online about the budget and you hear about the budget, you'll hear them throwing around almost 9 million, but that doesn't come directly through this vehicle, but it does contribute to the early education efforts in Durham. So just to clarify that. But the good news, the great news is, we did a lot of work at the last meeting to decide because it appeared that we were going to get flat funding, we did a lot of work to make decisions about how to prioritize the budget in the absence of any additional new dollars as a just in case plan. What we did was we used your priorities and applied them to the budget, which I'll talk more about in just a minute. But the positive news is that I really believe, thanks to your advocacy, as well as thanks to all of our families who have told the story of their child's experience in Durham PreK, as well as our really very seasoned and outstanding teachers, the county recognized that this was really a problem for us to receive a flat budget. And so what they have done is they've worked with us to provide an additional grant of one-time dollars that we could then use to reorganize the budget, and not the priority being not to cut seats. So we are going to receive a one-time grant to fund that, which we will use to fund the teacher support payments and other costs. Now, of course, a one-time grant has its own challenges. However, we see this as a real positive because these funds are available. They're very restricted funds, but with the restrictions for those funds, we have applied those restrictions in our budget, and these activities that we've identified meet the restrictions for those dollars. And we're very grateful to receive these dollars. We will be able to tell you in more detail about those dollars at our next meeting. They're all in the works, but the county has committed, and therefore we have moved forward with planning our budget around the opportunity to take those teacher support payments as well as the wrap care costs and some other costs and move them over to this one-time grant. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about it so that you'll know exactly what I mean. If you'll move to the next slide. So you'll recall from our May meeting that you decided, based on our recommendations, you decided that if funding was limited, that we would prioritize implementing the new framework for teacher compensation support payments. And let me say that there's two components to that. One part being required, we have to meet the salary increases that are coming from other sources from the state. But we also, you'll recall, we implemented a new category of payments, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But then you agreed that a strategy, if necessary, would be to delay the increase in the reimbursement rates per child. So those were the things that were agreed upon in May. Next slide. So talking a little bit more, just reminding you what you passed. It was passed in March and talked about again in May. We did a lot of work to share with you data that really shows that the salary requirement in Durham PreK is a heavy burden for sites. And it's difficult when that is tied to enrollment because you have to pay the teacher anyway, and you have to pay your instructional staff anyway, regardless of how filled the classroom is. And so our strategy has always been to have a teacher support payment. We had an experience payment. Ever since the first year of the program, we've had an experience payment. And that experience payment was designed to allow sites to hire a really seasoned teacher and not hire teachers based on budget, but to hire teachers based on the best candidate for the position. And that experience payment is really customized to that teacher's credentials, and the site gets paid um, a monthly payment to address and support the required salary in Durham PreK, which you'll recall we do require the teachers be paid on the Durham Public Schools scale, teacher pay scale. But then, over time, we have really struggled because the teacher experience payment was tied to only certified teachers. And if a teacher was less experienced and was working on their BK license, the site didn't get paid for that. But we have salary requirements for those people too that are a burden on the site. So this year, you'll recall, we did a lot of work to share with you information so you could decide whether or not you wanted to implement a new strategy. And you did pass the new base payment. So that monthly base payment will actually make a teacher support payment for the lead teacher, but will also add support for the instructional assistants. And the reason that we wanted to support them is because we have a requirement that teacher assistants are paid at the Durham living wage as documented by the city of Durham. And that living wage is substantially higher than what our North Carolina early education workforce study shows us that staff are paid generally in childcare. And so those two things create a financial burden. So we prioritized implementing the revised framework to support the teachers. And it's not just the additional resources that comes from the base payment that we've added. We also are committed to increasing the experience payment based on the new salaries that will be coming forth in the new fiscal year. So that was an absolute priority that you agreed to and set, and we have worked the budget out to accommodate that. Next slide. Okay, so this is just to kind of remind you where we are. We are not going to be able to implement the rate increase that you passed in at the March 2025 meeting. This is the perspective. When we brought the rate increase to you, we shared with you that we were recommending for 25-26 that we go to a pre-K rate of $15.14 per child per month. And that was a 4% increase. We are not going to be able to implement that because we prioritize not cutting seats. And the rate increase, although not implemented, will be a priority for next year, obviously, but also we believe with the increases in new resources coming from the teacher support payment, the instructional staff support payment, we believe that this will be a good step to our sites and will not be as much of a burden as it would have been. Obviously, we are now with the new rate, you can see at the bottom of the slide, we will stay with our current rate for 25-26, which is $14.56 per child per month. And although that is not an increase, again, this does not account for this rate does not account for that teacher support payment. In addition, you'll recall that each site gets what's called a pre-service payment. You passed that 2 years ago. The pre-service payment is the payment we created to address vacancies, to mitigate the impact of vacancies at a site throughout the year as kids sometimes turn over, and we pay on enrollment and attendance. So each site gets paid a pre-service payment. And when you calculate the rates based on inclusion of that pre-service payment, sites on average, the effective rate is approximately $1,674 per child. So that doesn't mean that we're happy about deferring the rate increase, but it does mean that it feels like there are supports in place that make it doable, and the prioritization of seats over the increase in rates feels like we can do that for this 1 year. We will, of course, be catching up next year, and that's a different problem. We will not be able to avoid cutting seats next year if we are not able to secure new resources. Next slide. Okay, so just to remind you again what we talked about in May. Basically, the guidance that you gave us after all the discussion was that we would preserve services by priority order if we got a flat budget. The blessing for us is we did get a flat budget, and there was no way to avoid cutting seats with a flat budget except for the fact that we got this grant. So the grant, again, as I already said, is going to pay for the teacher support payments as well as wrap care. So what we were able to do in our guidance from you to preserve services, we were able to preserve all of the services there in blue, but we were not able to increase the per month per child reimbursement. So there are other pieces that we also preserve, but these were the main categories, the most expensive pieces that really impact the budget most deeply. Next slide. So this is where we are right now. Our actual budget will remain the same. We will get a one-time dollar grant. We have no cuts to locally funded seats. We will implement the base salary support payment, which represents new resources for sites. We will increase the teacher support payments that have already been in place based on the salary increases. So we will meet the salary increases. We preserve wrap care for before and after school for students who are financially eligible. And we also did preserve a bonus for instructional staff. What happened was, even though that was at the bottom of the priority list, when we did the budget and we incorporated the funds that we were able to use for the grant, we had a small amount of money left over that wasn't enough to increase rates, but was enough to preserve the instructional staff bonus. Now, we don't know how much that will end up being. We had asked in our budget request for it to be a line item this year as a new thing. You know, you'll recall in the past, we've had an instructional bonus that you have voted on every year, and that bonus was dependent upon there being available dollars left in the budget. We had changed strategies to actually put it in the budget as a line item. And because we got a flat budget, that wasn't, we weren't able to assure that. But with the way the funds worked out with the grant, we do have some small amount of money that we will be able to do a bonus for next year. We just won't be able to commit to the amount until we move through the school year. Next slide. Okay, before we move to this, go back a slide. Let's give folks a chance. You may have questions. So does anybody have any questions that we can explain what we did or what the impact was?
Hey, I have a question. From the perspective of the providers and parents, like, are there any impacts? understanding how this is working behind the scenes, but how will this translate into like programs and just each school individually?
Right. So from a parent's perspective, obviously our goal is not to have any programmatic changes. We will be providing with this budget, we will provide the same family supports that we have had. Obviously, we have long-term goals to increase those, but for now, there won't be any cuts in that arena. So hopefully, all the support network that we have for families for their application process, for enrollment, for uh, their actual engagement at sites, there shouldn't be any changes. For our providers, inflation is powerful and everything costs so much more. And Tamara, if you'll go back a slide and go back one more. If you look at this slide, right now, based on median tuition in the private market, in the private childcare programs for 4-year-olds, we know that our Durham PreK rate is less competitive now. We're at 12% of the median tuition rate in Durham. That is not ideal. And of course, now that 12% does not take into account the pre-service payment, and it does not take into account the teacher support payment. But in the private market, the childcare sites are not paying teachers what we require. So you can't really count the teacher support payment. You can, however, count the pre-service payment as an asset. But being at 12% is not ideal. We have to acknowledge that things cost a lot. And we also have to acknowledge that our providers are under a great deal of strain because most of them are not just doing Durham PreK. Yeah, they're not just doing 4-year-olds in the public space. They're also serving other children, and those costs are impacting them. So I think that we can't underestimate the impact of all of these years of increasing costs and low increases in resources. We also know that in the early childhood space that the payments from the federal government that happened and were extended beyond the pandemic helped a lot of sites with a lot of costs, and those are closing out. So a lot of resources are being withdrawn for our early educators, and we also have to acknowledge that. So it's hard for me to answer your question, but I just feel that our teams are very aware and sensitive to the fact that for providers to not get a rate increase is not positive at all.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. And I appreciate that. And it was more for just context, only to just understand what the program itself is up against and how to continue those relationships with both the county and the city to help advocate for Durham PreK from a workforce and economic lens as well. Because I think the program has well invested in the quality and the education, and y'all are doing the best that you can for teachers and providers. But there's that whole, that's what y'all are supposed to do, and so that workforce, like we need the help from other people in the community to make Durham PreK what it is and utilize that local control and support that we have gotten in recent weeks. So thank you. And thank you for the other partners, the partnership, Families Community Rising, Durham Public Schools, like all of y'all are. So I think there's a lot to a sigh of relief to be able to continue for this year, but a lot to continue to advocate for.
Definitely a lot of advocacy needed. Beth has her hand up.
Yeah, I want to echo everything that Brittany just said, but I also, I guess I just want to your point about the cuts that are coming from other places. I think it's wonderful that so many folks were able to rally around the Durham budget and really make a difference in terms of what we were able to do for next year. And I would encourage folks, the state budget process is still not over. They actually are just now heading into the joint conference committee on the final state budget. And while there's more funding, originally they had told us there would be no increased funding for childcare. The House budget has a $60 million appropriation in the first year and $80 million in the second year, and the Senate has 80 million in both years. And those are great, that's helpful, but it falls far short of the 220 million that state child care advocates were asking for to stabilize the system. And so we're at a moment right now where we could really make a big difference. And I know Durham's delegation is wonderful and supportive and on board, but I think any calls that folks here can make to the leadership in the General Assembly, both houses, would be really important.
Thank you, Beth. I think that, those of us who work deeply in the early education efforts are really, really disappointed in what's on the table from our state. And obviously, we really encourage everyone to get involved. The other piece of this is that one of the reasons that we got a flat budget, frankly, one of the reasons Durham PreK didn't get the increases that we were hoping for is, the state has not invested in the public schools at the rate that is needed around the state. And Durham Public Schools had some specific needs, and they did not get their budget request either, but they did get part of their request, so they did get an increase. And we know that our investments in the youngest children with our 4-year-olds who are going to move forward into kindergarten are so important for their long-term success, but we also know that our K-12 colleagues are not funded at the level they need to be from the state, which is putting increased strain at the county level. So, and also, frankly, a lot of programs got cut in Durham. I want to acknowledge that having a flat budget, unfortunately, is a win in this environment because there were cuts across the board across the whole county services.
The one other thing I would add, Linda, is that unless there's a lot of pressure for the House and Senate to find an agreement, there's a very real risk that they won't pass a budget, or they might do mini budgets. And so to your point about K through 12 education, and not passing a new budget has massive consequences.
Yes.
For the takeaway, everybody, it's use your voice. If you are so inclined to do so, there's lots of advocacy needs and opportunities right now.
So true. Okay, Tamara, you want to move forward? And are there any other questions before we hear from Durham's Partnership for Children? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to the partnership. I know we're joined by both their acting ED and their program director, and I'll let you guys introduce yourselves.
Hey, do you want to introduce yourself first, or would you like me to just jump in?
There, I can just say hey, and then I'll turn it over to you, Jamika. This is Kate Irish, interim director with the partnership, and I've been working with Jamika and staff here on all things program and NC Pre-K. So I'll let Jamika provide the update. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much. Good morning. My name is Jamika Wells. I'm the director of programs with Durham's Partnership for Children. And I wanted to just really briefly discuss with you all, as we are talking about seats being cut and everything like that, that Durham was right-sized. So annually, the Division of Child Development and Early Education, which holds the state grant for the NC Pre-K program, assesses filled seats and unfilled seats in March for all of the counties across the state to determine, looking at underutilized seats and to see if they can be moved somewhere to be utilized. So after 6 years of looking at 6 years of data for Durham in March of filled seats, uh, DCDEE spoke with us and reduced our seats by 53. So our allocation ending in the 24-25 school year was 625. And now this year going into 25-26, it will be 572. We have the School Readiness Committee, which is the local NC Pre-K committee that is kind of like a governing body similar to the DPK Governance Committee. I agree, Beth, it is definitely very disappointing. However, the School Readiness Committee has voted on and continues to vote on a policy and procedure for seat allocation determination, using things like site selection, rubric scores, program compliance, monitoring compliance, whether or not there are qualified teachers in place at the time of review, different things like that to kind of help determine how we can allocate or reduce allocation across the different programs. All of the programs were reviewed and the seats were reduced across the different program options that participate in NC Pre-K. Public schools, Head Start, and community-based childcare. And as you all have said, one of the things that's really important is to use our voices, speak up, advocate for funding for seats, and additionally to that, advocate for recruiting families for seats. And so if you are wondering what you can do, those are two very big things that you can do. Does anybody have any questions or anything?
Jamika, I was going to just jump in too. I think, the state had contacted us about right sizing, and I've been bristling at that framing because obviously in Durham, we do not think it's the right size to be reduced by 50 some slots. So I wanted to clarify that. I think, as Jamika said, we are just prioritizing getting our slots filled. I think what we've learned is having unfilled seats, which happens for a variety of reasons, right? Families that have transportation issues, families reporting they need wrap care. Like, there's so many factors that go into it. But that said, we need to get the seats filled and keep them filled. And so I think we're really trying to prioritize doing that, understanding families' needs, just wanting through this group and the school readiness committee to be really carefully and thoughtfully tracking things as they go this year and seeing if changes need to be made, in the coming years, because we certainly don't want to have this happen again. The timing feels really, really poor for doing this. I think we're surprised and are welcoming sort of collaboration and strategies with you all to make sure we can maximize and do the best that we can for 4-year-olds in Durham. So just adding that to what Jamika was already updating.
Yeah, and I do want to mention also that in our role at early years, we do have the opportunity to engage with other counties, their school readiness committees, and this has been a blow across the state. One of the biggest concerns has been the really late notice regarding this. All of the counties were contacted in May around this, and there's been quite a lot of concern, and it's not ideal to do business this way when it's time for us to be offering parents seats to learn the cuts so late. Creates a real problem. And I just want to emphasize that this is a statewide problem. This is not just a Durham.
I'm just curious, has DCDEE given a lot of information about why this happened? Like, is it a financial issue, like, I'm just curious if what information was shared with partnerships before this all happened?
I mean, I think what they told us on the call was that they were wanting to make sure that, you know, for counties that had a history of having some unfilled slots, that they reallocated the slots so that they were all being utilized, and that they were concerned with, as a state, being the overall budget being cut if it looked like as a state that the slots weren't being well utilized. So it seemed like that was the priority for them, is reallocating them so that counties, you know, that have a history of filling them and using them were able to use the slots.
Hey, this is Christy. I've heard the same thing. But what's interesting is I've talked to several partnerships who have waiting lists and they got cut. So it makes absolutely no sense. So I'm just wondering if you've heard anything else. That was the initial response that other partnerships had shared too. But even in places where they have waiting lists, they cut slots. So that doesn't seem like they're reallocating. Maybe they're going to go back and reallocate. That's my hope. But yeah.
We're actually in that place. I mean, we do have, you know, a bit of families who are on the wait list for specific placements. But we do have other families on the wait list that, you know, just through for a myriad of reasons, we were unable to get them started, placed and enrolled in starting school.
Beth, I see your hands raised.
I didn't want to unmute. I apologize. The other thing I wonder about is that we are hearing increasingly that a lot of state agencies are getting increased scrutiny with the STAVE initiative, which is, you know, kind of trying to match the federal auditing piece that's being run out of the state auditor's office. And there's a lot of like looking in nooks and crannies of all the state agencies. And I do wonder to what extent that anxiety is rolling into this too.
They definitely, because of course, when we were told about our seat reduction, my initial reaction was, oh my gosh, do y'all understand the service this is going to give to the Durham community? Because we all know that there are numerous income eligible and age eligible children to that we could serve in the community. And so even one less seat in the community means that there's one less child that will be able to be served for pre-K, which, you know, is like Beth mentioned, is disappointing. But when they put it in the perspective of the fact that, you know, the legislature is looking at the state across the board and these different programs across the state. And if DCDEE on the state level continues to carry a large number of unfilled seats, then eventually the legislature is going to think the same thing. Like, why do you all need this much money allocated to this program? And that then would impact the entire state, not just some of the counties. And so that helped to put things a little bit in perspective. I still am rallying around it in its impact to Durham, but that is definitely something that kind of helped with putting things in perspective a little bit better.
So I think it's going to be really critical for this group to be aware of enrollment, right? And to know what strategies are in place so that all pre-K seats are as fully as enrolled as possible. Because, right, the scrutiny is going to be, it's going to be heavy in this upcoming year. And so I think that might be good for this group to be really aware and engaged in what's enrollment like, where are the issues, what are strategies in place to make sure that those families who are on the wait list because they can't get into the seat that they want, like what else, are there other options there so that we can not have empty seats? I think that's going to be critical.
Yeah, I think the the other piece of this also is once the dust settles, I think that it will be important for us to have accountability to DCDE for sharing the final allocations statewide and being able to follow what they did and assure ourselves that it was a case where a seat that was taken away was allocated somewhere else and that there weren't hidden cuts that were not acknowledged. And, I just think that we can all benefit from a more transparent approach so that we know where the resources are allocated, what's available, and that we can better support the statewide preschool program. So we know that the problems with vacancies are really related in many ways to the underinvestment in the program. The rates are low from the state. Durham has invested local dollars to make the rates more reasonable, but across the state, that's not necessarily what's happening. And, there are no resources to address the issue of RAP, transportation, all those things. So anyway, I do think that we have to be aware and really vigilant about what's actually happening and not just accept what they put out, So Brittany's got her hand up.
Hey, I'm just curious to hear what other locally funded preschool programs around the state are saying. And I think in that unique context with like the budget constraints, because we do know, every community has its unique needs and barriers, but it would be interesting to hear, especially like the rural programs and how we can use the success of Durham PreK, but also uplift the needs that other locally funded preschool programs are doing that are essentially a stopgap in the underinvestment that's been happening across the state, but use that as a strength because I think strength in numbers right now is going to help.
Good idea, Brittany.
Okay, any more questions for Jamaica or Kate? Well, Kathy, I'm thinking we want to end on a positive note. So if folks are ready, we'll move to our celebration component. And I'm going to ask Tamara if she will, well, or Maggie may be here. You'll hear some great news.
Sure. So this week marks the start of our first Early Educator Academy in collaboration with Durham Tech and El Centro Hispano. It is going really, really well. We have 20 students in this first cohort. We received 140 applications for this new program and just a huge outpouring of interest from community members. This is structured as a bilingual hybrid program. So the class that they're taking at Durham Tech is EDU 3119, which will lead to the North Carolina Early Childhood Credential. These are all participants who are not yet working in early childhood, but are interested in finding a position in the field. So Kathy has been incredibly flexible in how we structure this course format. And we've been offering all kinds of different in-person and virtual support to this first group of participants. You all may remember we received a grant from Duke Doing Good to seed this work. We were awarded $10,000 to start it with a pilot group of 10. But based on the huge response, we ended up finding additional funds, thank you, Linda, to serve 20 students through this pilot. We are still actively raising money for this program, so I've included the link to the donate page. Please do share it with your networks. What we're finding is that this is an incredibly compelling model for participants, and we really want to be able to circle back and serve these other applicants through this format with another course as soon as possible. The participants are going to have access in a bilingual format to the full course. to CPR first aid, SIDS, other required certifications, and then also participate in job shadowing opportunities in childcare centers all across Durham that participate in the apprenticeship, with the idea that at the end of this, they will have the opportunity through a job fair to be hired in one of our partnering employer sites and begin a full year in the apprenticeship program to continue their development and training. So we're very excited and looking forward to seeing where this goes. Thank you to all of you for helping make it happen.
Yeah, and I want to clarify that I don't get the chance to find money very often, but we had a small amount of lapsed salary that we were able to redirect to try to add more students, because obviously the demand was just overwhelming. I mean, 20 is such a small part of the 140 applicants that we received, and I can't say enough about the partnership with Durham Tech and under Kathy's leadership. We absolutely are benefiting so much. Our workforce capacity building in Durham in order to support our long-term goal for universal preschool is really dependent on the workforce, obviously. And at a time when early education may not be at the top of people's mind when they think about career, having this type of program and having this type of support is really can be transformational. And especially given this interest, I think that this model is one that we will work really hard to identify resources to expand. Absolutely is a priority.
And we're thrilled here at Durham Tech to be able to be part of this work. And I cannot tell you how amazing this group of 20 students are. The energy and excitement. Class started on Monday. They've already come to 2 meetings. I mean, they are just an amazing group of individuals. And what this is really showing us at Durham Tech, and I think everywhere, is that there are a lot of people who do want to do this work. And we just have to set it up for them in such a way that it works for them. And so this is super exciting. And yeah, we're going to go beat all the bushes to keep finding money to support this.
Yes. Yes. And I will just one other point of clarity. You may hear about early education academies around the state. There's initiative going on. That those programs, the couple that there are, they're very different. They're only a 2-week opportunity. And so this model is very different than the one that's going on in other places in North Carolina. Thanks, Maggie. And if you would like to donate, please do. When you go to that link, you'll see that all the donations we receive throughout June, July, and August will go toward this particular part of the work. So, all right. So Tamara, we'll turn it over to you.
All righty. In addition to our apprenticeship news, we had our first graduate of the Durham Early Childhood Educator Apprenticeship Program, Ms. Carla Muhammad. She walked across the stage in this May, a few weeks ago, at the commencement ceremony at Durham Tech, and she did receive her Associate in Applied Science in Early Childhood. She also carried the unique distinction of being the very first graduate of the Durham Early Childhood Educator Apprenticeship Program. So congratulations to all of us, but especially Ms. Mohammed. So thank you for all those who helped support the apprenticeship program, and we are very excited of this opportunity. And she was very excited. She had her family there. I think we have the next slide. We also have pictures. So she worked for a New Beginning, and so her family was able to participate in the graduation, as well as 50 other incoming kindergartners to Durham Public Schools who walked across the little stage at the Durham Armory a few weeks ago. And it was very, very exciting. They were so proud of themselves. The place was packed. Ms. Darnella did a great job with this presentation. All the kids knew their names. A lot of them knew what they wanted to be when they grew up. Just a very, very great time was had at this particular event. So kudos to all, and we are so excited for all of our graduates for the 2025 school year.
Well, we've come to the end. Does anybody have any other questions? I'm impressed we were able to get this done in less than an hour and really appreciate your time to do that. At this time, I'm not aware of a reason that we will need to have our July 17th meeting that we scheduled just in case, but don't want to jump ahead too soon and say we don't need it. So we commit to you that we will notify you by the end of June for sure, if not earlier, whether or not this meeting is needed. It's a meeting we schedule every year as a just in case we have an urgent need for the opening of school in terms of voting and that type of thing. Brittany's asking about, could we hold it for advocacy? Obviously we serve at your pleasure, whatever this group wants. We have it on our calendar.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Just hold that date, everybody, for either governance or an advocacy. Yeah. Good idea.
Yep. And then our September meeting is scheduled for the 18th at 9:30, and it is actually scheduled to be in person. We hope you'll be able to join in person. We do have some remote capabilities, so if you absolutely can't come in person, we will work with you to potentially access it remotely. But we hope that we will see everyone for sure in September as we start off the new school year.
Okay, thank you all for coming today and for being engaged in the meeting. And that concludes our June 12th meeting. I'll just need a motion to adjourn.
This is Alex. I'll make the motion.
Thanks, Alex. How about a second?
A second.
Thanks, Jason. Okay, well, I hope you all have a lovely rest of your month. And save July. We will meet one way or the other. And so if you are in favor of adjourning, you can just leave. If you're not in favor of adjourning, just stick around. Otherwise,